1928, Warsaw, Poland. A child is born. Well, I'm Max Glauben. My name is Max Glauben. Max Glauben. My name is Max Glauben. The Max was just created by myself after liberation, but in Poland it was Maniek, and also in the Hebrew was Mendel. My family consisted of my father, Yitzhak Isaac Glauben, my mother's name was Feiga Glauben, and my little brother named Heniek.
Max's early years were spent in the Jewish quarter of Warsaw, Poland.
Well, I remember living with my parents in a very comfortable apartment, and the city of Warsaw was a metropolitan city. When the war started, I think it lasted maybe 2 weeks. In fact, one whole day, there were nothing but planes circling the city of Warsaw and dropping leaflets stating that if the city of Warsaw does not surrender, they were going to flatten it completely. But in the meantime, the thing that was worried us worse was the fear of what the Germans would do with the Jews.
The Nazis quickly curtailed Jewish rights. Starting on September 21st, 1939, Jewish communities were ordered to establish Judenrat, or Jewish councils. In October, the first ghetto was established at Piotrków Trybunalski. In November, all Jews were required to wear white armbands with blue Jewish stars. The following year, in the fall of 1940, the Germans established the Warsaw Ghetto and forced the inhabitants to build a wall to separate it from the rest of the city.
You're talking about a confined area of approximately 1 square mile with all the people from Warsaw plus the surrounding areas were placed in there. There were rules made that in the Warsaw Ghetto, you shouldn't have any money, you shouldn't have any jewelry, you shouldn't have any furs. If you were found with any of the above mentioned items, you were automatically shot.
Max's family already lived in the area designated as the ghetto. Life was dramatically changing for them as well. Like many ghetto inhabitants, Max's father was forced to quit his job.
The inhabitants of the ghetto had to go to work, either in sewing factories or manufacturing uniforms for the Germans, or involved with some kind of work. In the same apartment, in the back of it, was a coal yard. And these people were good friends of my father's. They took him into the business and gave him a job. If you were working, you would receive a bona. A bona was certificates like food stamps. And sometimes a family member would start early at 6 o'clock in the morning to stand for rations. Then by the time he gets to the door, they wouldn't have any food because they were limiting the amount of food that was coming in. That's where we got involved in smuggling of food under the coal in double-bottom wagons and double-sided wagons. If something was smuggled back into the ghetto, it had to be packaged in such a manner that it would fit. And they could pre-arrange these things, and they have a lot of runners like myself. And usually you'll see that they had blonde hair and blue eyes. So if you went on a mission, you were not pointed out, there is a Jew. Or the youngsters like myself would have coats with maybe 50 or 60 pockets. And in groves, we would run through the gates, hoping that if they start shooting, maybe they kill 2 or 3, and some of us would survive.
Some of these children were caught upon their return to the ghetto and dealt with by the German authorities. In October 1940, all Jews in Warsaw were ordered into the ghetto. In mid-November, the ghetto was sealed, and conditions worsened dramatically.
And of course, we not only had to cope with hunger and thirst, we had to cope with diphtheria, typhoid, dysentery. I don't think there was a disease that was known to the human race that did not exist in the Warsaw Ghetto.
In July 1942, the Nazis ordered the Judenrat to hand over 6,000 Jews a day for resettlement in the East, marking the start of the Great Deportation. In truth, from July to September, about 300,000 Jews were shipped to the Treblinka death camp.
A lot of children were left as orphans. These are the children that would go out on the streets and become beggars, and a lot of them died on the streets like that.
On April 19, 1943, the eve of Passover, the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto began. As German forces entered, Jewish resistance fighters responded with bullets and Molotov cocktails, forcing the surprised Nazis to retreat.
The Jewish underground knocked on the door, came in and said, "We're going to set up some posts at your windows." They told all of us to get into the shelter. Within about 3 or 4 hours, the artillery and German armor was moved into the ghetto, and our apartment was destroyed by fire.
SS Major General Jürgen Stroop was pulled from the front line to crush the ghetto resistance. His solution was to burn the ghetto to the ground using artillery, bombs, and flamethrowers.
Anybody that lived or was hiding in the apartments above ground perished. Only the ones that hid in the basements were able to survive.
On May 16th, the remaining Jews were either killed or captured. Max and his family were taken to a staging area with other survivors and searched for valuables.
And it was the last time that we really sat together and spoke.
Survivors were then loaded on a boxcar, destined for the Majdanek concentration and death camp.
A trip that should have taken maybe 2 or 3 hours from Warsaw took 6, 7 days. 120, 130 people on the boxcar that I was in. 80 dead by the time we got there. I also remember the little opening. I look out there and see green leaves, and I says, why do I have to be inside here when everything is growing so beautifully in blue skies and the birds chirping? And I just couldn't understand it. At Majdanek, the cars were opened and we were asked to jump out of the car. I was standing next to my father, and my mom was next to my little brother. They stopped the procession. They counted 100 men, for a work detail, and then they said, women and children continue. And I was going to go with my mother and my little brother, and my dad held my hand and says, no, you stay with me. That was the last time that I saw any member of my family.
Max's mother and younger brother were murdered at Majdanek.
I was then placed on another boxcar and taken to Budzin the following day, and I was initiated into a concentration camp for slave labor in an airplane factory.
We went out on a Friday about 3 weeks into that camp. When we came back, there were 3 people missing. They decided to take 10 hostages for each person that was missing. My father was taken as one of the hostages. When I got up Saturday morning, some of the bodies were missing, and in their place, their shoes. I realized by seeing my father's boots that he was gone.
In that moment, young Max was determined to survive. For all he knew, he was the last surviving member of his family, the last person alive with the Glauben name. In the end, the Nazis realized they had miscounted the prisoners. Max's father, along with half of the hostages, died from a mistake.
I ended up in the carpenter shop, and because I'm mechanically inclined, I became a pattern maker for airplane parts of the Messerschmitt and Hangel.
The guy that I was working under was a murderer. He would come in the morning, he'll take a wooden chair and take one of the legs and start picking at somebody and use him as an example if we do any sabotaging, and start beating him up until the guy was dead. And then I was moved to Mielec, and that's where I was tattooed with the letters KL, which stand for Konzentrationslager in German, and I worked there under him again till the second half of 1944. Then I was moved to a camp that was in the salt mines. There was a factory in the salt mines of Wieliczka in Poland, and we stayed there less than a week. So we were transported to Flossenburg, Germany. This was one of the first camps that I was placed with other nationalities. April the 16th, 1945, I was then called out at 5 a.m. in the morning, and that all the Jews, and only the Jews, should fall out. We were placed in boxcars. We were told that we're going to our final destination. And we were shut up by the Allied fighter planes, some British, some American. When they were flying and saw the trains, they thought they were military trains, so they shut them up. So we were just innocent victims, and we lost between 300 and 400 people. And that's when we started on a march that ended on April the 23rd, when we were liberated by the 3rd United States Army.
Having experienced the worst mankind had to offer through the darkness of the Holocaust, now a young man, liberated and free, stands on the shores of a new country. What kind of life is this child to build for himself?
Kids always grow up and say, well, who's your hero? And you say your father. And to me, it's not a cliche. It's the truth.
You know, he was just a happy-go-lucky guy and woke up early, went to work, supported his family.
I don't think Dad started out expecting to be Max the survivor as the biggest part of his identity. He was so many other things. He was a terrific dad. He's a terrific grandfather. Now, thank God, he's a terrific great-grandfather.
I think what makes my grandfather such a special individual is his ability to persevere.
I know that everybody says, well, he is a survivor, but he had to work, and he had to be cunning, and he had to figure out skills that he probably didn't even know he had.
To live with what he had been through and not have this jaded outlook towards the world, this anger deep down inside, speaks a lot to who he is as a person.
The ability for him to continue to share it just enlightens more and more people throughout the world to continue to be an upstander and embrace that hatred is not something that should be allowed on this planet.
His life has had a really dark start, but it's grown into just the brightest light you could imagine.
He wants the family to know what he went through, but he wants the family to, keep this story, share the story, let everyone out there know what can come from such a bad thing.
It was when I was 14 or 15, I was in Brandeis AZA in Dallas, and it was my turn to plan a program.
He says, do you have any ideas? And I looked at him and I said, he's sitting right over there. I don't know that it was the first time that he ever spoke, to a group, but it was certainly the first time that he spoke to a group of the kids' friends.
And there were a lot of wet eyes in the room from, 13 to 18-year-old kids who had never been exposed to the Holocaust.
I wish that I had been in the room with the original survivors when they met in I think, Mike Jacobs' living room, to talk about starting a museum. Originally, their goal was to honor and memorialize their loved ones who were murdered. But very quickly, that transformed into education, to honor them through education.
I picked up Max from the airport myself, and I asked him if he would mind stopping by our alternative campus. And he spent over an hour talking to them, and these were troublemaker kids who weren't. And he told them a bad decision does not make a person a bad person. He could get to those kids, and they loved him for it. And I think they will remember him for a long time.
And Max in particular has been a beacon to our congregation and to the community as a representative of the survivor community, as the one who, in his gentle and kind and compassionate way, shares these powerful messages.
Max has a goodness to him that just sort of radiates out. If you've had a chance to meet him, you know that there might be evil in the human heart, but Max shows you how much goodness is out there as well.
He commands a room with positivity and joy and captures the minds of his audience. I don't think this is because of something he learned or has practiced. To me, it's because he cares deeply about the mission of preserving the memory of the Holocaust, and more importantly, learning its lessons so it can never happen again.
When you hear his message and you hear his story, you hear about what happened, you hear about his family, but I think there's a lot he's never going to disclose. I think part of that is I think it's too hard. And the other part of it is I don't know, I think he recognizes that a lot of that hate and a lot of the unimaginable things he saw have no place in today's world and are not going to do good.
His story, while sad, has a lot of lessons for learning and lessons for the future and hope for the future.
When we decided to add the Dimensions and Testimony Theater to the museum, we knew that we had to have someone from Dallas participate. And Max really was the perfect person. Max just had such a varied experience during the Holocaust that there's so much that we can learn from him. With his amazing memory and storytelling ability, it means that our visitors can really learn that history in a way that personalizes it and makes it memorable to them.
It's inspiring to see that someone can come from a place so dark and bring so much light into our world and remind us that there are lots of different ways we can react even to the most awful, unspeakable horrors.
Max is the embodiment of hope for humanity.
Max is more than what happened to him when he was in those camps. That's important, and now let's learn from what he did before, during, and after.
I remember reading about Max and his taking the young adults on the March of the Living, and how wonderful it is for these kids to be able to get that first-hand experience through Max.
It's the trip that many Jewish and non-Jewish students and community members go to visit the sites throughout Poland and Israel that pertain to the Holocaust.
So we traveled together to Poland, including to the Holocaust concentration camps. He was a witness to history and create witnesses out of my classmates and I.
You know, I'd break down so many times during the trip with sorrow and emotion and anger. And I asked him, Max, how do you not break down when you go back to the camps, when you go back to the gas chamber where you yourself lost so many family members? And he told me, after so many years, I've been able to accumulate so many tears of joy that they counteract the tears of sorrow.
If I could use one or two words to describe Max.
If I could describe Zadie in one or two words.
One or two words can't encapsulate what he is, what he means to me, and what he means to other people.
I would describe my grandfather as energetic,
vivacious,
quirky,
delightful.
If I was saying in a joking manner, it's probably his two favorite words, but mechanically inclined.
Goofy,
spunky,
funny,
strength,
survivor,
tenacious. He does not let go. Some would say stubborn. I say tenacious.
I guess if you looked up in the dictionary the definition of resilience, it would say Max Glauben.
Max is life-changing.
He is the consummate optimist.
Forthright.
I would call him a teacher.
Persistent.
inspiring,
loving, caring,
humanity,
forgiving, and fun.
And I would call him hopeful.
He's a beautiful human.
Very, very thoughtful and wise.
That's a hard one. I would probably say awesome.
There's a word in Yiddish and Hebrew, and it's a Mensch. He is an individual that, in a positive way, wanted to make this a better world.
Whenever I hear someone say the word Mensch, I automatically think he's 80.